Okay, today's video is going to be about slope. And along with that, writing an equation of a line, they kind of go together. So the one thing I want to talk about with slope, let's go ahead and share the screen. Y'all can see my paper, is the formulas you might need as you're doing slope. So when we think of slope, and if I ever ask my students about slope, the one formula they give me is y equals mx plus b. Nothing wrong with that. That's a great formula, and we are going to need to use it as we go through these problems today. Well, so why this is called the slope-intercept formula. And the reason it is called that is because you get two really important things from this formula. If it's written, now it has to be written exactly like this. It can't say 3y equals some stuff. It can't say y plus 5 equals some stuff. You would have to manipulate the equation if it doesn't say a 1y here. But this is going to be the slope, the number that sits in front of the x. And this is where the y-intercept is, which is where it crosses the y-axis. So certainly you could graph an equation if it was given to you in y equals mx plus b form, or you could say the slope or the y-intercept. This is the other formula that is very useful where slope is concerned. The y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. This is slope of 2 points. And we're going to use a little bit of graphing with this as well. I'll show you how to do slope graphically if you need to. So if they give you 2 points and they're asking you about the slope, then this would be the formula. And don't forget, when you're talking about slope, let's do a couple of pictures of different slopes. An uphill line, as you read from left to right, would be positive slope. A downhill line would be a negative slope. A horizontal line would be zero slope, and a vertical line would be undefined. So that's another thing to keep in mind, especially if you're going to do some of this slope graphically. All right, now there is one other major formula, because like I said, what we're going to be doing with slope is not just determining slope like you did in Algebra 1. We're going to be writing the equation of a line. All right, so the formula you need for that is called the point slope formula. And if you look up here at this formula I just gave you, it comes from this formula. We could think about multiplying these x's over here, and that's kind of where the formula comes from. It's the y's subtracted equals slope times the x's subtracted. So that if you know this formula, it's a little helpful to help you memorize this other formula. So the formula is y minus y1 equals the slope of the x's subtracted. So if you notice, it's almost identical to this formula, except we've just moved the x's over. Now, the only really big difference, and a lot of students get confused because they're like, what did you do with the x2 and where did the x sub 2 go? Well, it kind of drops off because when you talk about this formula, it's called the point slope formula. So when you're using it, you only need a single point and a slope, of course. And that's why there's only a subscripts of 1, because we're only using a 0.1. These are going to remain letters. When you use this formula, and we will be using it in just a minute, we will be using keeping these y and x here as a letter. All right. So the other thing that when you're writing the equation of a line, here's a couple of pointers on that. You need to know the slope. Now, I doubt if they'll just flat out give you the slope, but let's just pretend maybe they would. So we're going to say could be given. Probably not. More than likely, you're going to have to compute it with the formula I just showed you above, y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. Or they might actually give you the formula in y equals mx plus b, and you can pick it out from there. But regardless, if you're going to use this point slope formula, you have to have your slope to go in to this spot right here. All right, the point x1, y1 should be given to you. So that part you're not going to have to worry about. However, The second thing that's going to happen is a lot of times in geometry, you may have to change the slope. So let's talk a little bit about that. If they tell you parallel lines, that's the symbol for parallel lines. Parallel lines have the same slope. So if they told you they wanted a parallel line, then you're not going to have to change the slope. But if they said perpendicular lines do not have the same slope. They have the opposite symbol. So if one's positive, the other's going to be negative. If one's negative, the other's going to be positive. And they have the flip of the fraction. Remember, slope is a fraction. So that is what we're going to have to do if we're thinking about this slope. Okay, let me go ahead and give you an example of how this would work and what these problems might look like. Okay, here's a good example. So write the equation of the line or a line parallel to y equals negative 2x minus 4 and through 1 comma negative 6. Now, before I even start the problem, sorry, let me move some of this out of the way. I want to go ahead and make sure you understand that this is your x1, y1. Now, there are sometimes that they could give you 2 points and you would have to compute the slope. And then, then if you get ready for the point slope formula, you could pick either one that you wanted. But we're only going to use 1 point, remember, in this point slope formula. Okay, now let's talk about the slope here. The slope of this equation, because it is written in y equals mx plus b form, is negative 2. So the slope is negative 2. So I'm talking about parallel. And just a minute ago, I told you that if you're talking about parallel, you don't have to change the slope. So that's the number I'm going to use in my formula. Let's go ahead and write the formula. And let me just box the things that we're entering in. We're entering in numbers for all 3 of those boxed items. And then we're going to do just a very little bit of simplifying. So y minus 6, that's going to turn to y plus 6. And the slope, negative 2x minus a 1. Let's go ahead and change that to a plus before we do anything else. And while I'm changing that to a plus, I think I can go ahead and distribute this. So we are going to have a distributing step. Be careful as you distribute, because that's negative times negative. That's going to be a plus 2. And we're almost done. We now just need to subtract the 6, because we do typically want to leave this in y equals mx plus b formula. So the correct answer to this problem should be y equals negative 2x minus 4, writing an equation of a line. Okay, let me see if I can find one that's a perpendicular. Okay, here's a good one. Okay, so example. Now I'm going to use the symbol for perpendicular. It's this upside down T, because it looks like those 2 things are perpendicular. So that is the perpendicular symbol. Perpendicular to y equals 1/7 x minus 11 and through 7 comma negative 10. Okay, now when we talk about, here's our x1, y1. Let's go ahead and just, go ahead and say that. And our slope, if I go over here and write the slope down, it's 1/7. But remember, if you're talking about perpendicular, you need, if this is positive, the perpendicular slope is negative. And if it's 1/7, you're going to flip it to 7/1, which we can just drop off the 7. So this is the slope I'm using. You've got to be real careful with the right slope. Let's go ahead and write the formula. I always write the formula every time. It helps me remember it. And go ahead and put the parts in the formula. Y minus our y value of -10. That's going to turn plus mx minus our x value of 7, y plus 10, do your distributing, plus 49. We're going to subtract 10, and here is my resulting formula. Oh, sorry, that's not supposed to be a, let me just change, it's supposed to be a plus right there, sorry. So my equation is y equals -7x plus 39. And this, if you graph this, now remember, I told y'all this on one of the other videos. If you've ever had if your teacher hasn't gone to Desmos and done any kind of work in Desmos, you could actually graph these. You do have Desmos when you take the LEAP, and you could graph these to see if they looked perpendicular, and they would. Okay, last thing before we go, I want to show you one thing about slope and graphing. If you were having to find slope of 2 points, just get a sheet of graph paper and you were graphing it. It's very simple to do. Let's just take the point 1, 2 and -3, 7. If I wanted to find the slope, we use what we call rise over run. 1, 2, -3, 7. And if you've seen the midpoint distance videos I did, it works very similar. We're going to connect these 2 points and draw a right triangle off of these 2 points and count just like we did in the other 2 formulas, midpoint and distance. So that's 5. And this is 1, 2, 3, 4. So this is a downhill line. Now you do need to think about that as you're computing your slope. And now we just need to make a fraction of the rise, which is the vertical change, this amount over the run. So the slope here would be a -5/4. So if you ever are having trouble with the slope of 2-point formula, the y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1, go to graphing and see if you can get it by graphing. All right, folks, that's all for today.